All right. Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from today. And happy new fiscal year. Welcome to today's CSAW webinar. Our speakers for today are Jonathan Evans and Eugene Wang. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. First, please note that today's meeting is being recorded and you may opt out at any time if you wish to do so. Today's presentation will be emailed out to everybody on today's call. It'll also be made available directly in the chat pod, and you can download it directly from there. If you have any difficulties downloading it, this is specific to those of you that are accessing the webinar through a web browser rather than the Zoom application. Please go ahead and email us at csaw@gsa.gov and we'll send over a copy to you. Your mics will be muted for the entirety of the presentation. And just like Jonathan said, if you have any questions about today's topic, please drop that in the Q&A pod at the bottom of your screen. We will try our best to answer questions throughout the webinar, as well as we'll have a dedicated period for Q&As at the end as well. We are capturing attendance on our end, and there's nothing that you need to do to obtain your CLPs. The Zoom system is automatically capturing your attendance, and those should be sent your way within 2 to 4 business weeks. If you don't receive them, please go ahead and email us at csaw@gsa.gov, and we'll make sure to get that over to you. Finally, a post-event survey will be sent out to everyone following today's webinar, and we kindly ask that you take a few minutes to complete that. It would really help us improve your CSAW webinar experience in the future. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan and Eugene. Feel free to introduce yourselves, and looking forward to today's webinar. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Carla. Very good afternoon to all of you who are on the East Coast or in the Midwest. For those of you who are in the Mountain Time and Pacific Coast, good morning. We're glad you're here. We're going to be talking about performance-based acquisition today. Before we do, listen. You've shown up here to the CSAW webinar series, and you've got 2 choices. You could listen to Eugene and I in the background and just capture your CLP and go, hey, I checked the box. But we're going to try and make this fun and interactive. So I encourage you, don't treat this like any old webinar. Participate, show up, listen. We've got lots of good insights and information for you. And you all can make this way more exciting by asking us the tough questions that force us to use our acquisition knowledge. In fact, if you can stump us today, you get extra credit. I mean, not for real extra credit, but you get bragging rights or something like that. If we can't answer a question, obviously, we're not going to try and make one up, but we'll find an answer for you. But we welcome the challenge. So today, what are we talking about? Performance-based acquisition. Who are we? We are the Civilian Service Acquisition Workshop Program. My name is Jonathan Evans. I am the Program Manager and Senior Facilitator for the CSAW program, and I am joined by Eugene Huang, who is our newest facilitator for the program, and we're very excited to provide this training today. So, question, let's see. Are you all able to raise your hands? Do you have a hand raise icon? Oh, look at that. Folks are popping off their hand raised. Look at that. All right. Go ahead and lower your hands real quick. We're going to do a quick hand raise poll. If you have never heard of performance-based acquisition before, raise your hand. Brand new to you. You're like, yeah, that's why I'm here.
Alex, I keep climbing.
All right. If you've heard of it before, but you're not quite sure all the nooks and crannies of it, it's just you've heard of it before, raise your hand. Significantly more folks. Okay, so we had about 20, 25 in the first group and about 50 in the second group. All right, if you've heard of performance-based acquisition and you know it pretty well, in fact, maybe you've even done some performance-based acquisitions before, go ahead and raise your hand. Poppity pop pop. All right, and then if you would consider yourself a performance-based acquisition expert, raise your hand. Okay, I didn't see any new hands coming up. All right, well, fair enough. We've got a good diversity of understanding of performance-based acquisition today. Our goal for you, if I can get my mouse over here, is to provide you with an overview of performance-based acquisition, to talk with you about the different requirements document types, aka statement of work, statement of objectives, performance work statement. Eugene is going to talk about the differences between the types of documents and their advantages and disadvantages. And then we'll kind of get into some tips and tricks for how to write better requirements. All right, that's going to be really good. And then the way that we like to do Q&A is leave it up to you. If you have questions, put them in the Q&A pod, whatever you have, and we'll get to them as we go. And if we can't get to all of them, we'll try and circle back to them at the end. And whatever we can't get to today, we'll try and put together a blog post and put it in our Interact community, which I'll talk more about later. So let's get going. Eugene, you ready to go? All right, let's hit it. All right, folks, performance-based acquisition. What is it? Why do we care? Well, we care in part because it's in the FAR. The Federal Acquisition Regulations actually define performance-based acquisition, so that means it must be important. You can read this for yourself while I translate this into plain language. Performance-based acquisition is about telling industry the results and outcomes we're looking for and letting them figure out how to do it. So it's about shifting the perspective from being prescriptive to being descriptive in terms of the results and outcomes we're looking for. And we're going to talk about that in much more depth as we go throughout today. But we're not telling contractors how to do the work. Okay, and that's going to show up in several different presentations. Furthermore, if you're doing a services acquisition, if you're buying services, the FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulations, FAR Part 37 says performance-based acquisition is the preferred method for acquiring services. So if you are not using performance-based acquisition, you need to justify to the contract file why you're not. All right, so if you're doing a services acquisition, you really should be doing performance-based acquisition. It's good for you. I'll talk about that in a second. The FAR also says that we must use performance-based acquisition methods to the maximum extent practicable, which begs the question, what are these methods and what does maximum extent practicable really mean? So we'll try and do some interpretation of that in a minute. Now, this is from a compliance standpoint, and pay no attention to the other words in the word cloud because keyword here is compliance. I don't know why Australia shows up in here, but I've been curious for years as to where this word cloud originated. But performance-based acquisition is also important because it is good for us. What does that mean? It means that when they conducted a study in the 1990s on 26 acquisitions that were moving from being not performance-based, in other words, they were being prescriptive, to results and outcomes-based, performance-based, they found, on average, an 18% increase in satisfaction with the results and outcomes. So the government said, oh my gosh, we are getting such better performance now that we've made the shift. In addition, because you might be thinking, well, that's great, but I'm sure they paid more. Nah, au contraire. They actually saw a 15% reduction in price. So it is good for us, and the FAR says we should be doing it. So why aren't we doing it? Well, we're going to dig into that a little bit too. So what are these performance-based methods? Well, number one, use a performance work statement or a statement of objectives. Now, Eugene is going to go into this in much more greater detail than I am, but I'll suffice to say, statement of work, right, which is not up here. A statement of work is prescriptive. It tells contractors how to do the work, tells them the processes they must follow, the steps in the process. It tells them which labor categories they have to use, how many hours need to be associated with these tasks. It's very prescriptive. That's not performance-based. So the next step in the continuum is a performance work statement. A performance work statement still has tasks, such as the contractor shall A, B, and C. But instead of telling them how to do A, B, and C, we just say, we need A, B, and C done. You figure out how to do it. All right, and then you have on the far end of the spectrum, the most open-ended, we have statement of objectives, which is, hey, we have these big giant objectives. We don't even know what tasks should be associated with these objectives. You're going to have to figure that out. In fact, when you submit your proposal, you'll need to submit a performance work statement. So when you're doing performance-based acquisition, you will always end up with a performance work statement in the contract file. And either the government will have written it or your successful offerer will have written it. All right, but it's focused on results and outcomes, not how to do the work. All right, and so within that PWS, we also have to make considerations for performance standards. Now, those of you who raised your hand and said, yeah, I'm familiar with performance-based acquisition, or hey, I've done performance-based acquisition quite a bit. What we tend to see across government is that when we look at performance standards in the contracts that have been awarded, 95% of those contracts, the performance standards are about timeliness. So within 30 days of contract award, by the third Thursday of the month, by the 21st, by the whatever it happens to be, it's always time-based. There are very few contracts that we, the government, are awarding that are using quality standards. So, okay, yeah, you want this by the third Thursday of the month, but what sort of quality are you expecting? How do you define that? We see a lot of groups that are using like a small handful of performance standards to cover the entire body of work. And as a best practice, you should really have one requirement to one standard, or maybe multiple standards. So you could say, here's my requirement, here's my timeliness standard, here's my quality standard, right, for the same requirement. So every single requirement that you have, and when I say requirement, I'm saying anytime you use the term, the contractor shall, followed by whatever they shall do, for each one of those statements, you should have a performance standard in your contract. Otherwise, you open yourself up to a situation where you have lots of ambiguity. Contractor doesn't know what you expect. They're constantly calling you, going, hey, how do you want us to do this? What do you want it to look like? And then they deliver something and you, the government, go, well, that's not quite what we wanted. And they go, well, how are we supposed to know? So instead, make it clear. Put clear performance standards. Question. For some of us who may be at agencies who are not under the FAR, unless doing business with GSA, can you please explain the value of using performance-based acquisition? Yes. Just because you're not under the FAR doesn't mean the underlying value of performance-based acquisition isn't there. In fact, it's there regardless of whether you're FAR-based or not. This is as good for federal government as it is for state, local, tribal, as it is for you personally in your own life, developing contracts with contractors. You are saying, hey, I want, the contractor shall fix the leak in my bathroom. Okay, so you have a performance standard that says, you fix the leak within 24 hours, and you say, I don't want any leftover mess. I want the leak completely stopped, and the repair must be to code. All right, so from a quality standpoint, there's no more mess, and it's been done to code. And from a timeliness standpoint, it happens within 24 hours, as opposed to, and this is where it's just kind of common sense. You would never go, hey, I'm going to hire a plumber. Plumber, you need to come in. You need to disassemble this joint, and then you need to replace it with this part, and then you need to, apply this sort of glue and this sort of tape as you're making the replacement, and basically spell out all the code things. We would never do that. We just say, hey, plumber, come here. Please do this work for us. Please get it done. The difference in this little imaginary scenario is that instead of just paying, for an hour's worth of the plumber's work, we're actually specifying the performance outcomes that we'd like to see from their work. And if you're thinking, well, hey, the plumber would never go for that, you'd be surprised. Performance-based acquisition is really useful. It helps create clear expectations on both sides. So can you use this as a non-FAR-based agency? Absolutely. You're just simply telling your prospective offerers the results and outcomes you're looking for and what your expectations of quality are. Can performance-based acquisition be used for service contract like facility management? Heck yeah. That's probably one of the best places to use it. Facilities management, grounds maintenance, things that have a lot of repetitive tasks. The work is fairly well known. You're really just stating that work in terms of results and outcomes instead of which labor category should be brought in or how many hours or specific step-by-step instructions on how to do the job. Just use performance-based. Is it acceptable to collaborate with vendors on measurable performance standards based on their quality control program? So the answer is, and I used to be an 1102, so I can say this with confidence, it depends. All right, so yeah, I mean, collaboration with the vendor, particularly the contractor that's received an award, is important. But that being said, before you even get to the point of award, it's really clear that you, the government, it's really important that you, the government, have clear expectations of performance. Those performance standards get incorporated into the contract. The quality control program or the quality control plan that the prospective offerers will draft and submit as part of their proposal and that you'll review and ultimately award and incorporate into the contract, that's also important, but they're going to develop their QCP based on what performance standards the government has already put in the contract. So yes, they can collaborate in terms of the monitoring of performance and ensuring that the requirements are being done to the performance standards, but it is very, very important that the government itself sets performance expectations, creates those performance standards for all requirements. All right. Couple more questions here, and then we'll get back into it. Are IT security requirements considered performance standards or requirements? Nicole, it really depends. I will say this, it depends on the nature. IT can be very tricky because IT usually involves not just services, but it also involves some component of software or hardware or cloud or infrastructure, right? So there's a lot of different ways of looking at IT and how we're approaching it, but there's always within IT, there's always humans involved, and when there are humans involved, you've got an opportunity for performance-based acquisition. All right, so without knowing the specifics of your requirement, I can't really go much deeper than that. And last question, then we'll move on, and I'll get Rosemary's question a little bit later on. So what is the typical rule for shall versus will? Okay. Currently, the FAR still has shall as the strongest article that you could use. All right. Will, definitely out of the question. Do not use will. If you are not using shall, GAO and plain language doctrine have information out there about using must. So for all intents and purposes, must and shall have an equal level of enforcement or strength behind them. Whatever you do, pick one and stick with it, and don't use will. Don't use will, don't use should, don't use may. It's a shall and stick with it throughout, or it's a must and stick with it throughout. Great questions. All right, let's keep going. So the third thing that you might need, no, not might need, you do need, right? If you're doing performance-based acquisition, you need to consider appropriate incentives. All right, this one stumps a lot of people, especially at smaller agencies. Folks tend to get a little bit anxious about this. So if you don't have the ability or you don't want to delve into monetary incentives, there are other ways that you can tackle this. Now, I will tell you this, before you even get to specific incentives, the way that you write your requirements, the incorporation of performance standards, the type of contract that you put in place, whether it's fixed price or time and material labor hour, all of those things are part of the total incentivization of performance, right? So the structure, your acquisition strategy itself will influence performance and or promote innovation. So it starts with writing good requirements. Next comes solid performance standards. And then we kind of delve into the contract type and the structure of the cleanse and all of that good stuff. And then as we get a little bit further down, we can actually look at specific requirement level performance standards, or I'm sorry, performance incentives. And you can use incentive type contracts if you so desire, award fees, award terms, all that kind of stuff. You can also have monetary incentives at the task level. So if the task is written, the contractor shall do A, B, and C. Here's the performance standard. Here's the acceptable quality level. If they meet the acceptable quality level, they get paid however much was originally set. If they exceed that quality level, they get a little bonus. If they underperform that quality level, maybe they get hit with a financial penalty, a disincentive. So there's lots of different ways. It's very complex. And in fact, later this year, we will be doing an entire webinar on incentives. And for that matter, we're also going to do another webinar coming up on performance standards and the QASP. QASP, what's a QASP? Hey, look, it's number 4. Utilizes the quality assurance surveillance plan, or QASP, to define how the contract will be monitored. So if you're going to have incentives and standards and good, well-written requirements, you need to have a plan in place for how you're going to monitor. Nathaniel, yes. Tie the incentives to deliverables. Absolutely. So a quality assurance surveillance plan is the government's plan for how we are going to monitor contractors' performance. I'm going to say this, and I want everybody to listen. Even if you haven't been listening up to this point, if you've been working multitasking, if you've been doing other things, if you've been, playing a little game on your phone, I don't know what you've been doing, but right now, listen in. All right, come close. Do not incorporate your quality assurance surveillance plan into your contract. Don't do it. Quality assurance surveillance plan needs to be a separate document apart from the contract. There's a lot of reasons for this. But the quality assurance surveillance plan is our plan. It says, hey, what are we going to look at? How frequently are we doing the looking? Who's going to do the looking? And how are we going to calculate whether or not the performance standard has been met? Those are things that sometimes need to change. Sometimes you need to move from, hey, we're going to inspect everything to, hey, we're going to do a random sample. And sometimes it's critical that you, oh, wow, we're seeing a problem. We need to go from random sample to inspecting everything. If you incorporate the quality assurance surveillance plan into the contract, anytime you want to make a change, you will have to modify the contract. Whether you feel like you should or not, you will have to. And anytime you're modifying the contract, chances are the contractor is going to ask for some more money. Now, there's an important message in here as well. Your performance standards don't live in the QASP. Your performance standards live in the contract. All right, you're going to see a slide about this a little bit later, and we'll talk about it in more detail. But you should have your performance standards written into the contract in your performance requirements summary table. The quality assurance surveillance plan simply defines how we are going to monitor contractor performance. Now, if you have all four of these things, you might just have a performance-based acquisition. All right. Rosemary asks, can performance standards be included in a statement of work? Rosemary, a statement of work is typically focused on being prescriptive. It says how the work is going to be done, or it says which labor categories are doing the work and for which number of hours. So in a statement of work, generally what is being monitored is whether or not they follow the contract. So you could try and put performance standards in there, but it would start to get a little bit tricky depending on how you've written your requirements. So if you're going to go to the effort of incorporating performance standards, you might as well put in the little bit of additional effort and make it a performance work statement. That would be my advice. All right. So one of the reasons why across government we're not doing a very good job of performance-based acquisition is because it takes a lot of work. Eugene and I know we've worked with a lot of teams. The amount of effort, the level of effort it takes to get a team together to sit down and go, okay, how are we going to write these requirements in a results and outcomes, objectives oriented way? How are we going to do this? How are we going to write the performance standards? Going through and grinding out the language, wordsmithing, it takes a lot of work. And we don't like a lot of work, especially folks in the acquisition workforce who are awfully busy. We've got a lot of other things going on, so we're looking for shortcuts. We want somebody to just give us a template of something that's been done before so we can copy and paste or edit, and you know what? You can do that and you'll keep running into the same problems that you've been running into for decades. But if you want to start seeing something different, if you really want to start seeing genuinely fantastic performance, and let me caveat that a little bit. Some of you may be seeing genuinely fantastic performance, and I would argue that 9 times out of 10, the reason is you landed on a great contractor who, despite whatever ambiguity or uncertainty or ill-written requirements, say, hey, we're going to show up for you. We're dedicated to doing good work, and that's great. Whatever you did to get them, keep doing that. But there's always the chance that the next time we do a competition, we don't end up with that all-star. And then we start having the companies that are, you know, we meet for those performance meetings and they say, hey, we're the best thing since sliced bread. You should love us. And we go, hey, you messed up here, you messed up here, you messed up here, you messed up here. And they go, oh, well, yeah, but we're still the best, right? Or you get those vendors that are calling you daily. Hey, so how do you want me to take care of this? Hey, so how do you want this done? Hey, so what am I supposed to do here? Hey, can you explain this to me, right? All of those things are the result, not necessarily of their inadequacy, but as a result of our poor job in developing requirements and performance standards. So because performance-based acquisition is difficult, A multi-agency team got together in the early 2000s. That's right, folks. This has been a work in progress for 20 plus years. It's actually much older than that, but it got codified in the FAR in the early 2000s. They said, hey, we should give people a play-by-play. And so they came up with the steps to performance-based acquisition. For those of you who may have been around acquisition for a while, you may know this as the 7 steps. But we added an 8th. So now you just have to call it the steps. All right. So if you want to do performance-based acquisition, and Nathaniel says doing PBA is well worth the lift. Yes. Thank you, Nathaniel, for that. If you want to do this, it's going to take some work, but there are some steps you can follow that make it easier. And in fact, later on in the presentation today, we'll be sharing with you one resource, a free resource that you may be able to take advantage of to help you get to a performance-based acquisition. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eugene now to talk with you all about the different types of requirements documents to get a little bit deeper into an understanding about these. Eugene, over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you so much for a good explanation of the performance-based acquisition. So I am going to cover the definition of SAW, PWS, and SU, and what their commonality is and what the difference is. Next slide, please. All right, so one thing to remember while we go into definition of SAW, PWS, and SU is that it is different types of requirement document, but that explains common goals, that explains the need of government. This is to describe the requirement of what government is trying to achieve. Now, we're going to in details of what each statement of work, performance work statements, and statement of objectives are. Next slide, please. So definition of SAW. The statement of work is a process and method the contractor must use executing the planned work, meaning that this is something that government describes the work and how to perform. And also to note that this SAW is not something that FAR defines, although FAR defines the performance work statement and SU, the statement of work is not described in FAR. So part of that using SAW is to must incorporate into contract as it becomes the methodology of how government is seeking the requirement to be performed. Next slide, please. Now, the PWS. The PWS is a document that describes work in terms of requirement focused on the result and how the work is to be accomplished rather than how it's accomplished. So with the statement of work, the government is describing how and when the performance should be performed, whereas PWS describes the terms, the result the government is seeking, giving the benefit to the vendor to come up with an innovative way or new technology to be used. So it really eliminates a lot of responsibility from government to the vendor. And PWS is like a statement of work is incorporated into the contract. Now, it is also key to note the FAR's definition of performance work statement means statement of work for performance-based acquisition that describes the required result in clear, specific, and objective term with the measurable outcome. It is important to note that measurable outcomes, as we will discuss that further in standard and QASP. Performance-based acquisition is acquisition structured around result. So we'll describe that a little further. Next slide. Next slide, please.
Eugene, Sharon asked, do we always prepare and incorporate a SAW? If a service request is for $1,000, is it still necessary? Sharon, quick answer, no. If you're under the micro purchase threshold, just go buy what you need to buy. Put it on the purchase cart and be done with it. Now, of course, you may need to do whatever your agency requires for those purchases. You may need some form of documentation, but if I expand on your question a little bit, you said $1,000, but I'll expand it to something above the micro purchase threshold. Right? If you're in the simplified acquisition threshold, somewhere between 10,000 and 250,000 for commercial. We recommend that you consider a performance work statement, but it also depends on the nature of what you're buying. right? So if you're buying, a couple of examples, if you're buying a commercial off-the-shelf product, right, that may have some associated services with it, just focus on the preponderance of what you're buying. If you're buying something like a training course, just buy the course, right? Just, hey, Management Concepts offers this course. It's $6,000 for 30 students. Go buy it. If you want to buy multiple courses together, do that. So there are some circumstances where a statement of work could be used just to make things simple, but even in our little neck of the woods, we've been starting to explore our requirements documents for training courses and going, hey, how can we get away from being prescriptive and focus on the impact of those courses, right? So, hey, we want you to come in and teach a course on facilitation. But instead of just doing that, we want to say, well, what's our expectation of the quality of instruction, quality of participant outcomes, and that's performance work statement. So it depends. All right. Yeah, and Nathaniel says the problem with the SOWs, the government does not always have the subject matter expert to define what we want. In fact, Nathaniel, I'll do you one better. Oftentimes the government thinks that we know best. We do have subject matter experts, but their expertise is getting a little bit aged. So in all cases, wherever we can, it's almost always better to not be prescriptive of how we think it should be done and focus on letting industry tell us how they're going to do it using their best practices. All right. Back to you, Eugene.
Thank you. Those are really great questions, and I'm excited to go dive deeper in the next slide. So going over the definitions, statement of objective is the establishing a broad description of a government overall goals and requirement as a high-level objective or performance objective. Now, the key part on SAW is it is not incorporated into contract, and SAW is to get the PWS from the vendor. And to note that SAW is a government document. However, when PWS is proposed during the solicitation, government can decide either use the full performance work statement that was proposed or dissect and make that into the government's required document. So SAW, the end result of SAW is to get the PWS, and PWS is proposed from the SAW that is given, and SAW is a government document. It's not something that vendor will be writing it up. However, they will be proposing PWS based on government SAW. Next slide, please. So the difference of work statement, again, I want to emphasize that these three different documents are to describe the government's requirement and the objective. However, because there are three different documents, work statement, they have pros and cons and what can be used for best. So the biggest difference between SAW, PWS, and SAW, next slide, please, is really viewing whether the results-driven or method-driven or the control of the government. So with the SAW, statement of objective, it is what result the government really wants. It's a high-level objective. It is shown here as an example, stop the spread of COVID-19 in the US. It doesn't really describe how to perform it, what the requirement entails of in the details of that requirement, but it's really giving high-level objective. Hey, this is end result. This is the goal we want to get at. Whereas the PWS, it also can have high-level objective or sub-objectives, but it gives us a little bit of a guideline, a sophistication, and often listed as a task. And it really gives us some amount of guidance of what they're looking for, what government is looking for, but it is still at the end, the vendor to provide how they're going to meet the objective. So with the PWS example, it can be, along with the COVID-19, test 5,000 people per day. So the high objective of SAW will be COVID-19, stop the spread of COVID-19. But when the PWS, it gives a little more sub-objective to how the government like to reach that goal and what the government wants from the performance. Now, SAW, the statement of work, are prescriptive. It really tells the government what to do and how to do. So it'll, for example, with the COVID-19, again, it gives the objective of implement drive-through COVID testing. Now it's coming down a lot more than broad, high-level objective. It says use thermometer to test its participant. Again, it is really describing what government wants it and how does it want it to be done. Now, these different type of document that explains, again, needs of government, but it goes into high-level objective of what the result we want, what the government wants, and what and how government want that requirement to be fulfilled. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about advantage and disadvantage. Obviously, they are describing government's requirements. However, just like everything else, it has a pros and cons. So one of a good big advantage of SAW, statement of work, is by describing work in detail, the government really has the control. It provides preferred approach or solution. For example, with a car, if we just tell them high-level objective could be, hey, or change the engine oil. But do you want certain grade of engine oil? Do you want to be filled with a full engine oil exchange, or do you want just to top it up? So it really gives an advantage on government how the job should be performed and what the end result looks like. Now, but disadvantage is the SAW requires a contract to follow government's approach, meaning that if we prescribe them to use, hey, fill this vehicle tank with gasoline, well, happen to know these are diesel engine. Now that gasoline is not going to work. But the problem is because the government described, we told how the job should be performed. Now the onus is on the government. So vendor performs it without question because this is what government told us to do. Here we are. So if contractor follows government's approach and end result is unacceptable, that is a big disadvantage because we told them how to do the job and they follow to the teeth. The end result is government's responsibility. So many SAW are so bad, so broadly written because of explanation will follow through, not enough details to provide to the contractor, and oftentimes that can be disastrous to failure. And also there's a tendency to limit competition and result in incumbency because they know how they were doing before, so it falls on them very easy, which you will see often with the DoD requirement. And there are some advantage of it because researchers and weapon developments, whatnot, we'll describe that further down the line. So big thing is you cannot have performance-based acquisition. So now we're talking about performance-based acquisition. If you want to use the performance-based acquisition, you cannot use statement of work. Next slide, please.
So one thing real quick on this, Eugene, that I've seen is, so when we talk with agencies, they go, hey, we recognize that we shouldn't be so prescriptive. So they'll take a statement of work and they'll just start adding more language to it, more adjectives, more nouns. I mean, they have these run-on sentences and the paragraphs get so big. It says the contractor shall, and then, half a page later, the paragraph ends. And so what's happening is folks are trying to add more language to ensure that it's not prescriptive. And as a result, what they do is they make it ambiguous. And then nobody knows what's supposed to be done. And that's where that bullet about benefiting, the competition tends to benefit the incumbent is because they know how to sort through that. They know what's actually going to be expected. So be really, really mindful of this. If you just try and take a statement of work and cross out statement of work and write PWS, that's not performance-based acquisition. You have to put in the work.
Thank you. So now on performance of work statement. So advantage of a PWS is there are plenty. It becomes more. It articulates the government's requirement in clear, specific object terms of outcome and result rather than method. So it allows vendor to come up with a method how they're going to meet the result we describe. And they will identify measurable performance, a method of assessing contractor performance, outcome, and deliver, which is a key part of a performance-based acquisition, that we have a measurable performance that is monitored and that is agreed with the method of assessing the performance, and it's deliverable. So there are many advantages that describes into further here. Again, I think I will lead you to read it. The biggest advantage really, it comes down to the innovation of a vendor. That really promotes competition. It reduces the responsibility and cost to the government because some of these vendors have all these new technologies, new methods they've been using, perhaps with a different agency that we are not, your agency was not particularly aware of, and they can bring those advantage for you if using PWS to describe the end result, what you're looking for in tied to high-level objective and sub-level objectives, that what you're looking for, giving the freedom to the vendor. One thing I will state with the PWS is the FAR 37.603. I do want you to note that, and FAR 37.604. Again, understanding some of your agency may not use the FAR, but with using PWS, you must have a performance standard that 36.603 states that when offers propose performance standard in response to SAW, which creates the PWS, it must create performance standard and how they are going to be measured, which goes into further quality assurance surveillance plans. So just like anything else, there are disadvantages of a PWS as well. One thing that Jonathan described earlier, and some of your questions did come up, is that preparing a PWS really requires a lot of input, a team-based approach that requires not just the CO, CS, PM, core. It involves some people from finance, even legal, obviously subject matter expert, and the requirement owners, and some people you may think they're not even involved with it. But it is really important and crucial to get their input, because without it, it is really difficult to get agency support, to get all those folks together and have a consensus, and to use that consensus to establish the performance requirement. Again, going back to the vehicle engine oil example earlier, if we are using SOW, they fill up the tank, engine, and they use the wrong gas, the ownership is on the government. Well, with the PWS, let's say if you completely omitted SME for whatever reason, or core was not attending post award or aware of a PWS, now they're not speaking same term, which will hinder measuring your performance and the same method they'll be using. So that is the biggest disadvantage of PWS. Next slide, please. Now, last one is a SAW, and SAW again does a drive to get PWS from vendor on the proposal. So SAW is a government prepared document, again, government owned document, provide the basic high level objective of the requirement, the state's overall performance objective. Now, SAW is provided to the vendor, and vendor submits a proposal with a PWS. Now, advantages, again, it really gives the maximum flexibility. If we tell them this is what we want, this is the end result, how can you get there? What is required to get there? The vendor will provide all that information in PWS. Now, industry is able to apply its knowledge and experience, as you described earlier, because of the freedom, because of their advanced technology innovation they're using. We will be benefiting that. Government will be benefiting that. And also it enables the government to better assess offers understanding, because sometimes you give them statement of objective, let's say example of COVID, hey, we want to stop COVID spreading. Even non-medical people may start thinking, okay, maybe mask, maybe vaccination, maybe proximity issue. So there's a lot of things you can think of, but let's say if a vendor comes with a PWS based on SAW, they state, we will segregate everybody so that we stop the spread germ. Well, you can already tell the vendor has no clear understanding of what government is looking for. So this can be good advantage to weed out some of those performers who will not meet your result and what your objective is. Now, the best part, the PWS is proposed with SAW from the vendor. So it can eliminate a lot of structural work that you can initiate. But again, the PWS they propose is not full government document until you accept that and gets incorporated into the task order. Now, there's additional advantage that I will not go into through, but there's one great part of the QASP and quality control plan. So with the SAW as a performance-based acquisition, you're really going to have a performance standard, agreed performance standard, which will clearly dictate whether vendor failed or met the requirement. And by using the performance standard and quality control surveillance and all forward, you will be able to support your incentives and come up with a different type of incentives and how those incentives can be given. So it really ties back wholesome to the performance-based acquisition. All right. So just like all other good things, there are disadvantages with the SU as well. So going with the PWS, the evaluation process is more time consuming because it's really not apple to apple you're comparing. Oftentimes, the vendor A and B can receive same statement of objective, but their approach might be a lot different. One could be more systematic, more industry cost-driven focus. Maybe another IT vendor that had the same objective that we were given, they come up with a better service-oriented, and that's might be what we're looking for. So again, when you're comparing those evaluations or proposal, it really doesn't become the applicable. So you will require good input from your subject matter expert and your technical expert people to evaluate. Now, along with that, the IGCE, IGE, independent government estimate, won't be readily determinable prior to receiving offers because if they're using new technology or innovation, we may not have enough information on what actual true cost on those are and how that can affect the proposal and solicitation. So that is the biggest disadvantage of SU.
So Eugene, Nathaniel wants to know, are you in favor of the government attempting to prepare a draft PWS or simply developing the statement of objectives and leaving the PWS to the vendor? What do you think?
Thanks for that question, Nathaniel. You know, the best part in being acquisition force is the wonderful term, it depends. It really does depend. Now, if you, from my lack of little experience, if you're developing some research or technology contract, it may be best to give them SU so they can come up with some innovation or some new technological advance. And if you are just a purely contractor person, not having a lot of technical background, that can get you a good starting point. But if you draft the PWS, you are setting up, I like to call a sandbox that allows the vendor to come up with an innovative way to meet your requirement within your parameter. So you can get down to saving some time coming up with the PWS, because again, PWS requires a lot of input from all of a different group of people to ensure you're using same definition, same understanding of the requirement and deliverable. So drafting PWS can save you a lot of time and also kind of give the guidance to the contractor when they're submitting the PWS as a proposal. Jonathan, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that would have been my answer too, is it depends. Here's the thing. I think the key word that Eugene has continued to say is innovation, right? So a PWS allows for some innovation, even when the government develops it, right? We can develop a PWS. We're not dictating how the work gets done, but we are dictating the deliverables. We are dictating the results and outcomes. So there's opportunities for them to innovate in terms of how they reach those results and outcomes. With a statement of objectives, when they write the PWS, they are going to be writing what those results and outcomes are, what the deliverables are. So in that sense, it's even more potentially innovative because there may be results or outcomes that the government had never even considered. So that's why Eugene mentioned IT. That's why he mentioned research and development, because those are two of the most common areas where we see statement of objectives used. And honestly, most of the agencies I work with, they know enough about what they want in terms of results and outcomes. They know enough to be able to put together a PWS. And if you have enough information to put together a set of task statements, I recommend that you do it. Put in the work, put in the effort, write the PWS. If you don't have enough knowledge, subject matter expertise in order to be able to do that, then you could do the SU. And then the last thing I'll say on it is there's also a place for using a hybrid. So maybe for CLINs 1 through 3, you've got these big task areas that the government really knows what should go into them, so they can map those out. But maybe CLIN 4 is a little bit more uncertain, and maybe we want to promote more innovation there. So you could write the task statements for CLINs 1 through 3, and then make CLIN 4 kind of a statement of objectives and be like, hey, look, for CLINs 1 through 3, you're going to propose how you're going to manage and technically approach these. CLIN 4, you're actually going to write the requirements for it and what should be done. So as a follow-on question, Nathaniel says, so are you saying we shouldn't include deliverables in a SAW? Generally, yes, you should not include deliverables, because if you know what the deliverables should be, you should write the statement, the performance work statement. Betty says, if government develops a statement of work, can we put in the table of the performance base to allow government to track deliverable tasks? I'm not 100% sure I'm tracking with you, Betty, but you know, look, this is a good time for me to introduce the fact that performance-based acquisition is a maturity model. Okay, so there's an ideal state way over here, and then there's everything other than performance-based acquisition down here. And our maturity model basically says we want to move the needle. So if there are things that you can do to incorporate more performance-based methods into whatever you're doing today and move the needle closer and closer to our ideal state of performance-based acquisition, that's great. Shannon, it's like you read our minds. Is there a standard format for SOO, PWS, and SOW? Well, let's see. Eugene? Oh, we got to talk about this first. We'll come back to that, Shannon.
Yeah, we'll come back to it. So I like to leave you with this slide. This is something I came across a long time ago from one of my acquisition training. I was able to find it again. But with whether you're using statement of work, statement of objective, or PWS, I think the common goal of those documents is government requirement. That's what we're trying to achieve. But also at the same time, it is key, very important for us to remember that when you have your IPT, when you have your team, please involve them as early as possible. This is a great example because everyone has different priority, even with your same subgroup, and they have a different definition of done. They have a different point of view, different advantage and disadvantage they are looking at. So it is very important to come to the common ground, understand that the definition you're using is common. They clearly understand what you mean by white or black, whatever the color you're using, or 2 inches or measurement. I even had an example incident where the contractor was building OR room for Air Force for the F-missile program. And one of them, they had to build the OR room in Japan. And they actually asked us if the measurement need to be in metrics or the American standard. I mean, those are kind of things that you don't even think about when you're coming up with a PWS or your work statement, because you just think, oh, OR room, you're going to build OR room, standard American, ER room, same thing. But when it comes down to some of these input, when it's required and you don't receive it, you will have an amazing swing set that's attached to the tree like this, depending on what you're looking at. So that's it from me. I'll pass to Jonathan on deciding which work statement to use and what's best fitting. Thank you.
I'm so glad that Eugene incorporated this image into our deck today, because this is the reason why step 1 in the steps to performance-based acquisition is form the team. And then all of the remaining steps focus on the team engaging together. One of the single biggest pitfalls across government, you probably have experienced this, you may continue to experience this, and it is, hey, program offices, write the requirements. Don't give it to contracting until you've got the requirements, you've got the IGCE, you've got the market research, you've got the purchase information, your financial information. Like, you can't talk to contracting until you have the package done. And then it goes over the fence into contracting, where they work on it in a vacuum, right? And do the acquisition planning, and they map stuff out. And oftentimes they'll come back to program office and be like, your market research isn't enough. Your IGCE isn't realistic. Your requirements don't make sense to us. And the program office gets upset, and they go, why is it taking contracting so long? And contracting gets upset at the program office. Why don't they know how to write good requirements? And I've been on both sides of the house, and I can tell you this. There is a simple solution to this. Work together. Yes, ultimately the program office has a responsibility to complete the requirements package. Yes, ultimately contracting has a requirement to complete the acquisition package. But when you work collaboratively together, where contracting is involved in the requirements, programs involved in the acquisition, you get better results and outcomes. And then you don't have this mess, all right? You could save a lot of trees this way. Okay, so with that, we're going to move on to formats. I'm just going to touch on this really quickly because I want to get into some tips and tricks for writing better requirements. So there, as Eugene said earlier, there is no specific format for a statement of work. A lot of times we're using uniform contract format from FAR Part 15, but it really depends on what type of contracting you're doing. So here are some things that you might see in a statement of work, but it really depends on whoever's writing it. They're all over the map, right? So it's really hard to say. In fact, here's some additional sections that might also be included. There is no one format for a statement of work. And your agency might have some guidance on it. They might say, hey, your SOWs have to use this template. That's neat and all, but templates can be our Achilles heel. Templates are neat to a certain extent, but then sometimes it takes the thinking out of the process. And when you take the thinking out of the process, you're not doing the best possible work you could be doing. PWS, this is what the FAR has to say about a PWS. Okay. It basically says, describe work in terms of results and outcomes rather than how. It has measurable performance standards and encourages competitors to develop and institute innovative and cost-effective methods of performing work. So you might be asking, well, where's the format? There is no format. The FAR has nothing to say about the structure and format of a PWS. I do have a PWS concept template that we might be able to share out with attendees. It's very bare bones. It's a wireframe. It basically has some common section headers, including the performance requirement summary table. I'd be glad to share that out. But there is no one size fits all. Interestingly, when we get all the way over here to statement of objectives, the FAR finally has something to say. I don't know why. And you know what's really ironic about this? The FAR tells us what has to be in the statement of objectives section-wise, but then this doesn't get incorporated into the contract. In fact, the FAR says you cannot incorporate this into the contract. So why is it prescriptive about what it should look like? I don't know. You have to ask some acquisition professionals who helped write the original language. I have some guesses, but I'm not going to make them here. So 6 sections that must be included in a statement of objectives. And then, of course, you can include other stuff as well. The big thing here, I'm looking, yes, number 6. The big thing here is operating constraints. And I really think that this is very important for a PWS as well, right? Is that you talk about constraints that are in play, things that folks need to watch out for. The other kind of counter, or not counter, the other player in the mix, constraints and assumptions. So if we, the government, are making any assumptions about how the work is to be performed and in what environments and this, that, and the other thing, we should state any assumptions we're making. And one of the things I love to do is ask that when vendors submit their proposals, they also document any assumptions that they are making about the work that's to be performed. Because guess what? Despite our best efforts with market research, even putting out draft solicitations, industry is still left with the need to make some assumptions because we haven't been entirely clear. And so assumptions and constraints, really important. Proposal characteristics. So what are you going to get back from industry? If you go out with a statement of work, what you'll get back from industry is basically a copy and paste of your statement of work. You say, how are you proposing to do this work? And then they will copy and paste from the statement of work into their proposal because that is what you've asked them to do. And so if you're using a statement of work, you're going to get what you ask for, good or bad. And honestly, if you're using this methodology, you might as well just use lowest price technically acceptable because there's no distinguishing value from one offer to another. So again, we might be a little biased. In fact, I can guarantee we are biased against statements of work. Really trying to push for everybody in government. If you're doing services acquisition, you should be using a PWS or statement of objectives. So with a PWS, what are you going to get? You're going to get a technical approach, a management approach that talks about how they are going to meet the requirements, right? How they are going to accomplish those objectives, how they're going to meet those results and deliverables that you've outlined. So you're really going to be distinguishing between the technical competency and methodology of one vendor versus another, maybe looking for innovations that they've included. And then a statement of objectives is arguably the most difficult source selection of all three of these. All right, because when you have a statement of objectives, each vendor is writing their own performance work statement. So now you're evaluating what requirements did they put in there? What standards did they include for themselves? What is their technical approach? What is their management approach? You're evaluating all of these factors together. So I have seen a lot of agencies use statement of objectives and take shortcuts on their evaluation. And sometimes folks have gotten away with it, and other times it's really bitten them in the behind. So if you're doing a statement of objectives, don't think that because you're doing it, you're off the hook for putting in the work. The work just shifts. So if you do PWS, the work is upfront to develop the requirements and standards. Source selection should be pretty straightforward. If you're doing a statement of objectives, putting together the requirements, you don't really have to. You're just putting together objectives. So the upfront work there, pretty easy, nice lift. But then the back end work for source selection, that's where it's going to take a lot of work, and you're going to need to put in some thought into how you want to do that. All right. If there are any questions, keep them rolling in. We're going to go about 12 more minutes, and then we'll start our wrap up here. So hang in there with us to get your full CLP. And if you're just sitting around waiting on that CLP, that's fine, but I hope you're listening and absorbing some of this. We don't have the ability to unmute you, so if you've got a question, go ahead and open up the Q&A pod and type it in there. Steve and Sandra, I see you. So go ahead and type your questions into the Q&A pod. Nathaniel asks, if you have a parent single award BPA or IDIQ, doesn't it just make sense to release statement of objectives or PWS at the call or task order level? You know, Nathaniel, you keep asking us all these different questions, and unfortunately, the answer almost universally is the same, and that is, it depends. I would say, no, it doesn't just make sense to release a statement of objectives. Well, you said statement of objectives or PWS. Yeah, it does. Sorry, I'm going to reframe my answer. Yeah, a statement of objectives or PWS would be most appropriate, because then, and honestly, PWS is probably the better call, because if you have a single award BPA or IDIQ, You really need to make sure that at the call or task order level, you have clear performance standards, because the BPA and IDIQ can't foresee the full spectrum of call or task orders. That's why it's a BPA or IDIQ. So the performance standards really have to be put in at the call or task order level, and that the place for that is in a PWS. Now you can have a vendor do it as you put forth a statement of objectives, but again, that's where it kind of depends on the nature of the requirement and what the BPA or IDIQ are structured for. Procurement with a statement of objectives seems like you would have to use a firm fixed price contract rather than time materials so that the risk is pushed as possible to the contractor. Actually, Heather, I would say the vast majority, and I'll give you my 2 cents on this after I say this. So the vast majority of statements of objectives that we're seeing are being put forth for IT development, for systems modernization, and a majority of those are for agile. So for if you're not familiar with it, you can look it up, agile development. And in that model, like if you look at some of the big folks like 18F or Digital Services Playbook, they all are pretty strongly pro time and material labor hour. As a performance-based acquisition subject matter expert, I'm pretty pro firm fixed price. So yes, I think firm fixed price should always be used preferentially to any other contract type. And if you're doing commercial services, folks, cost type contracting is prohibited. You should not be doing cost type contracting for commercial services. What's a commercial service, you ask? You can do your research, but there's very little these days that isn't commercial. You got some very specific military type stuff that is non-commercial, but almost everything else has a little foothold in the commercial space. So firm fixed price or time and material labor hour is the way to go. But yeah, great question, Heather. Complicated. If I use a statement of work for a contract, can I change it to a PWS to renew that contract with the same contractor? I mean, maybe. Chances are, if you tried to restructure your statement of work into a PWS, what you'd really be doing is you'd be modifying your requirements a little bit. We're going to talk about that here in a second, and you'd be adding a layer of performance standards. So, well, first of all, you're definitely going to enter into a modification negotiation with the contractor. So depending on how they feel about the new requirements and standards, that you may get some pushback. If you're significantly changing scope, or it could be perceived that you're changing scope, you might have some issues with legal, and you might be told you can't do that and you need to just cancel the existing contract and recompete it, because you need to offer up fair competition. In fact, that's probably going to be the answer that I lean towards, is if you were going to try and make a switch from an SOW to a PWS, you'd probably have to cancel the original and do a new competition, just for fair competition. Eugene?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that question because it kind of some similar. So describing Sue, understanding how the source selection may take longer, it involves a lot of people. I mean, it sounds like a lot of work. So why can't I just recompete and change the PWS they use? Why do I need to recreate everything?
You're supposed to be on my team, Eugene. Look, we've worked with a lot of teams. We've worked with a lot of teams on trying to move their current requirements documents into a performance work statement format. And it's nice from the standpoint of, hey, we've got an existing set of requirements, so that makes sure that we can capture everything that we need in the PWS. But one of the hangups is people keep getting stuck in how it used to be, and they can't get out into the mindset of how it should be or how they really want it to be. So there is a use case for kind of clearing the slate and starting fresh. And then once you've kind of gone through the exercise of identifying a performance-based set of requirements, validate that against your previous document to make sure you captured everything content-wise. Like, did we capture all the major areas that we need done? Yes. Okay. But now it's in a much cleaner format. I don't know if that exactly answered your question, but
yeah, no, thanks, Jonathan. And just to everybody's benefit too, to note that oftentimes you'll have a contract base plus 4, and every year you see, 4%, 10% increases depending on the contract type and contract vehicle you're working on. But note that after 3 years, maybe you want to renew the contract. Maybe you want to use a PWS instead of a statement of work. But note that because all those benefits will be reduced in cost, new innovative technology being implemented to your contract, and some of the terminology being changed as well. If you were running call center, for example, tier 3 support versus tier 1, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, contract may mean differently right now. So a lot of those things can be implemented as you are changing or updating from PWS to SAW. Yes, it does require extra work. Yes, it does involve team to play nicely together, but the end result as a performance-based acquisition, there will be greater benefits of it. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thanks, Eugene. Yeah, and, folks are asking some great and arguably specific questions in the chat, and I'm so grateful you are, because that's exactly what makes this conversation dynamic. And I don't mean to be flippant. Eugene and I don't mean to be flippant when we keep saying it depends. But the reason we say that is because we understand that there's a lot of pieces that we may not fully understand, right? So Sandra, for you, one of the things I'll say is, yes, CSAW does have those options and forms. In fact, if you're having some challenges, I'd throw out a name, Dr. Amy Knight. She's over there at CSAW. Reach out to her. She's actually a certified CSAW facilitator, very familiar with performance-based acquisition. And she could be a great resource to you in breaking through any logjam you might be having, and help your team come together around it. How does all of this apply to federally funded research and development corporations? Absolutely, you can use performance-based acquisition when setting up arrangements with FFRDCs. Absolutely. Statement of objectives works really well when you're leveraging the FFRDCs for research and development. And depending on the nature of your requirement, yeah, it's a service. It's still a service. So for services acquisition, it's still great. It's still really useful. Even though the FAR will tell you that for research and development and construction, it may not be as applicable. I say maybe, but there's still a place for it. So try it out. All right. There's a couple more questions. I will, it's Sandra, it's Dr. Amy Knight. Let me, I will type my answer to you here. She's great. You can tell her, you could give her my name and say you came across me in a webinar. And yeah, she's awesome. All right. So a couple of tips on writing requirements. These are going to be in the slide deck that Carla has shared in the chat. If you can't access that in chat, don't worry, we will send it out via email. But if you're able to download the document from chat right now, you can get into it. There's even some stuff that Eugene and I won't have time to go over today. Requirement statements in your performance work statement do not need to take up half a page. Let me rephrase that. Requirement statements in your PWS should not take up half a page. There's a lot of different things that you should be doing to make them clear. I'm not going to have time to go into this in a ton of detail right now, but I will tell you that a well-written requirement statement has a clear result. It has the appropriate action verb before the result, and it has sufficient context after the result for someone to understand what that requirement means. Now, in this case, this example, is showing that as written in the original statement, contractors shall train system end users on how to use the system. What are we really looking for? The result or outcome we're actually looking for is training, right? So the way that it's written, the result looks like system end users, and system end users are not the result. The result, the deliverable, is the training. So if we restructure the statement, contractor shall provide, or the contractor shall deliver training, context to end users on how to use the system. That may seem like a very simple adjustment, but believe me, when you start to get into your requirements and you go through, especially more complicated requirements, this becomes incredibly useful. What is the result or outcome, and are we stating that up front? And then do we have the correct action verb, right? Providing versus delivering versus creating versus revising, you know, there's lots of different action verbs, and we need to be very specific about what we're looking for, right? So again, language here, words matter. It's very important. One of the things that we always say is anything following a preposition is context. The reason we say that is prepositional statements in a sentence are kind of the weaker portion of the statement. And we want to have your meaty stuff up front. We don't want to water it down in a preposition. In prepositional phrases are important. They create, they define a relationship between things, or they provide understanding about you know, nouns or verbs that have been stated already in a sentence. And I know this is a grammar lesson. Some of you are like, wait a minute, I signed up for acquisition training, not a grammar lesson. But guess what? Words and grammar matter. And if you're part of the acquisition workforce and you're involved in requirements development, guess what? This is important to you. All right. So we're going to be doing a whole course, a whole webinar on the ARC method. I believe it's coming up in November. We'll see here in a few slides. So if you want more on this, check us out in November. Here's that PWS concept that I was telling you about, right? Real bare bones. It's got background, scope of work, states your high-level objectives, followed by your performance requirements, which are organized by high-level objective. And then you've got your performance requirements summary table, which restates your requirements, but also includes your standards, acceptable quality levels, incentives, and any applicable documents. If you use a format similar to this, when you're doing a performance work statement, it will pay out dividends for you. All right, it's very valuable, very useful. Also, from a plain language standpoint, please don't have giant paragraphs that take up a page and a half. Okay, simple, precise sentences, bullets, lists, tables. Don't be afraid of underlining or bolding or italicizing things. Okay, anything that makes the document more readable is good. All right, so use some of the plain language best practices. Also, one of the reasons we stress you should work on this stuff together as a team is because oftentimes those of you who are real technically minded, right, you're the subject matter expert in a particular technical field. It makes sense to you, you're familiar with the jargon, but when somebody else reads it, they go, what the heck are you talking about? So you need to have that balance of technical language, but also ensure that it's readable, that it's understandable. All right. Be careful of ambiguity. We'll be talking more about this. This is the table I was talking about. So if you look at this real quick, the first three columns here, I guess it's really the first four columns, but I kind of ignore the first one. So the performance objective, performance standard, AQL, those are all part of the contract. And then the last column, the incentive column, is also part of the contract. Those four columns should all be in the contract. The bit in the middle, the data source, the method of inspection, who's responsible, and calculation, No, those are in the quality assurance surveillance plan. That's separate from the contract. It's apart from, it's outside of, and you can change that whenever you need to. All right. Again, we're going to be doing a webinar on performance standards in the QASP, and we'll be digging into that more later this year. So now it's time to talk to you about some resources. But not before I address Luda's question here. Is it possible to use PBA when the government is performing some of the work? For example, we use teams performing training. They're a mix of government and contract staff. How can a PBA be used in that scenario? Wow, great question. So you already know the first part of the answer which is it depends. But the second part of the answer is you need to write your performance-based requirements around your expectations for the contractor. What do you expect them to do? And how are you going to measure their success at that? All right, so if you're partnering with them to provide training and they are helping to develop the curriculum, then what are your performance standards for them around curriculum development? If they are contributing to the delivery of the course, they're going to get up and instruct alongside you, then you need to consider, the quality of instruction. And so you need to think about your methodology for how you're going to monitor the quality of their instruction, and how would you define the quality of instruction for them. So you may not be able to use something, for example, if I go back a slide, you may not be able to use something like a knowledge check, right? So if they get to the end of the course and they take a knowledge check, but the instructors for the course were a mix of government and contractor, the knowledge check is gonna be, the overall effectiveness of instruction, which includes the government's participation. So that would be hard to hold the contractor accountable, because if we have a government employee that gets up there and they're a terrible instructor, then the contractor would suffer in that. But if we have an end of course evaluation where each instructor is separately evaluated on the quality of their instruction, we could use a participant follow-up survey to evaluate the contractor's instruction. So there's definitely ways to get at it. You just have to think about what's important and what specific responsibilities they'll have and what deliverables they will be responsible for versus the government. So yes, it is doable. Is it slightly more complicated? Sure, but it's not insurmountable. All right. Eugene has said, and I have reinforced, one of the main reasons why performance-based acquisition does not get done in the government is because it takes a lot of upfront effort. It takes pulling the team together. The team has to work together. Well, we've got a resource for you, and it's called a CSAW, Civilian Service Acquisition Workshop. If you are in the DoD, I've got good news. There's also SAW, SAW, and those are provided by Defense Acquisition University, and they're free to you. All you have to do is reach out to Defense Acquisition University, and they can work with your integrated project team, your integrated acquisition team, your multifunctional team, whatever you're calling your combined team. They can help you out. If you're a civilian agency, we can help you out. That's what our program is all about. We're here for you. And guess what? We're free too. We're a free service. So what is this CSAW? Well, we will help your team develop your vision, your mission, your high-level objectives. We'll help your team get into your requirements and write performance-based requirements. We'll help your team with performance standards, and also talk about your acquisition strategy and coming up with a great performance-based acquisition strategy. We want to meet with you early, right? So if you're already deep into the process and you're like, hey, I've got to put a solicitation out in December, it probably is a little too late for a CSAW to be effective. But if you're going, hey, we've just been asked to pull a team together because we've got a major acquisition we got to get awarded in late 2024 or early 2025, guess what? this is a great time to get engaged with us, and we'll work with you. What we do is we provide you with a facilitation team that has expertise in performance-based acquisition, and we do both facilitation and coaching. We've had so much positive feedback, both immediately following the workshops and also a year later when we followed up with teams. Folks have told us it was incredibly valuable. Oftentimes it does kind of throw a wrench into people's milestones, but for the better. They go, you know what? We ended up having to take a few extra months, but we're so glad we did that because we got a better acquisition package put forward, and we ended up with better outcomes in the long run. So we're here to help. We can help you write better requirements. We can help you implement performance-based acquisition. So check us out. We're at gsa.gov/CSAW. Oh, it's not November, it's December. So December 13th. I believe that the registration for this will open on or about November 13th. So mark your calendars. It usually becomes available about a month in advance, but you can also keep checking our gsa.gov/CSAW. And you know what? We can probably even do one better. Carla and team, we can probably even send out an email to this whole crew as soon as that registration link goes live and let them know that the next webinar is coming up and when to register.
We can absolutely do that. Yes.
Yes. Awesome. All right. So keep an eye out for that. Also, market research in February, we'll be talking about that. That's a new webinar this year. We're excited about that. Performance standards in the QASP coming up in April. So stay in touch. We actually have a couple more additional webinars that will come after that, but we'll announce those as we get closer. Folks, thank you so much for attending. If you are interested in a CSAW, reach out to us at CSAW@gsa.gov. Eugene and I, it's been a pleasure working with you and training you today. Glad you showed up.